Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Dying Your Way podcast. It is with great pleasure today that I am going to introduce you to Julie Ryan. She is just a phenomenal, so accomplished, but a phenomenal woman. And I know you're just going to be so fascinated by this interview. Just a brief bio, and her resume is long, but she has a very eclectic background. She's highly known in the medical device world because she has patents and she's developed a lot of medical devices that are used to this day all over the world in surgeries. And she's an author. She has been an entrepreneur and just developed many businesses. And it is incredible that now she's spending her life as a psychic and a medical intuitive, and has really come into my awareness, because of the work that I do. And she has a book that we'll be talking about. It's called Angelic Attendants. And I read it. I couldn't put it down. I mean, because so many of the mysteries that we have about end of life, it all kind of made sense in a way that, from what I'm visually seeing when I'm with people, and what she is intuitively and psychically able to tap into. So this may be stretching, some belief systems that you have, and I want to respect that and be sensitive to that. But I would just say, listen with an open mind, and you'll have opportunities later on in the next few weeks, if you wanted to even call into her show and ask your own questions, that you would be able to do that. She has a podcast, Ask Julie Ryan, and she could answer some of your questions that we may not cover here today. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Julie. You're really going to love her. And Julie Ryan, hi.
Hi, thanks so much for that lovely introduction.
Well, it was kind of wordy, but there's just so much to say and describe about you. So
Thanks.
The broad brushstrokes of who you are. So we're talking to each other. I'm in Western Australia and you're in Birmingham, Alabama. So it's evening for you, morning for me. And just thanks so much for just crossing my path. I was really surprised when I read your book that I couldn't put your book down. So maybe we could just talk a little bit about, maybe the first question I'd say is, how did you go from this very STEM like background to being a psychic energetic healer?
Well, first of all, it's fun and appropriate that I'm talking to you real time in the future for me.
Yeah.
You're talking to me real time in the past because of the time difference. Because
so
it's
profound.
It's already the next day where you are. So it's kind of a little sci-fi.
It's a lovely day today.
It's a lovely day. It's a lovely evening here in Sweet Home, Alabama.
Yeah.
So yes, very much so. How did I go from being a businesswoman into a medical intuitive and psychic? A little over 30 years ago, Claire, a friend gave me a book called Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Mace for my birthday. And I read it and I thought, oh, this is interesting. She called herself a medical intuitive. And then I'd always, up to that point, been in the medical industry, as you mentioned, developing surgical devices, and early in my career, selling hospital supplies, hundreds of thousands of different hospital supplies as a big distributor. And so I was interested in this medical intuitive thing and I wanted to know more. So I went to a bookstore because back then we didn't have the internet yet.
Yeah.
And I did the old fashioned thing and I went to a Barnes and Noble bookstore to see what else was there. And I found a book called Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan. Now, Dr. Brennan is a former NASA physicist who parlayed very complex quantum physics principles into understandable English for the lay person. That would be me. I don't have a scientific mind. And I thought, okay, I still want to know more. I was being led. I know that now. I didn't
Mhm.
at the time. In the meantime, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm doing the business thing. I'm busy.
Yeah.
And I called her school. I called Dr. Brennan's school and I said, do you guys have anybody in my area teaching this stuff? And they said, yes, we do. So I started studying with my mentor, and we're still in touch 30 years later. And that's how it all came about. And then in 2015, I sold my surgical device manufacturing company. I still had other companies going too, but they kind of ran on their own. They
Mm,
needed just a little bit of guidance from me.
mhm.
And I thought, what am I going to do next? And I was led to get into this and to do this full time. So now my days are spent talking to people from all over the world. And
Mm.
I say I'm a businesswoman who learned how to do woo woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness.
Wow.
So so
No,
I
I mean,
scan people. I can see broken bones, medical things. It's like I'm a human MRI.
wow.
Facilitate energetic healings, can communicate with deceased loved ones, can communicate with any spirit, whether it's attached to a body or not, communicate with animals, do past life stuff, do talk to spirit guides, angels, tell how close to death somebody is. So it's really fun because when I get to talk to people, sometimes we'll cover multiple topics. Most of the time we will. And on my
Mm.
show, it's a blast on my weekly
Yeah.
call in show because they're
Yeah.
asking questions all across the board.
Yeah. 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 Well, I mean, I have so many questions, and I'm sure I won't get to all of them, in the time that we have. But when I'm working with people, I often compare, how we naturally die, that the body does know how to die, just like the body knows how to be born. And I compare the labor and the birth process a lot to, as people are dying, that's a labor process too, that there are, I'm because we can't see what's happening spiritually on the other side. I really encourage people when they're working with dying people to assume that even when clinically they've gone, that there could still be work, and to stay with that body, and until you just know that it's over and finished. From your point of view and your experience, how would you compare birth and death? And yeah, just how would you compare birth and death?
Well, I agree with you on the labor equation that it really is a great analogy, that it's like when a baby is
Mm,
being born, the mother goes through labor and so does the baby, because
yeah.
the baby's coming down the birth canal, hopefully, if they're not having a C-section. If they are, the baby's involved in that too. And when somebody's dying, I see in my mind's eye more from the spiritual side of the equation, this whole sequence of events, Claire, that transpires, that involves angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets that come, and there's a glorious component to what is oftentimes a heart-wrenching situation for the family. And I can communicate with the person who's dying, even if they're unable to talk
Mm-hmm.
anymore. I can
Mm-hmm.
communicate with them telepathically.
Mm-hmm.
And there are three questions I always ask. Number one, are you ready to go? Are you in pain? What do you need? And what do you need is all across the board. It's really fun. Some of the different stories that I've heard from people who were dying about what they need. It can range from, I need a blanket, or can you bring me a chocolate bar, to can you pay my quarterly estimated taxes, kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
even down to the point where families have gotten information from their loved one who's dying about, here's where my will is, here's the bank, here's the street, here's my lockbox number, here's this
Yeah.
kind of stuff,
Yeah.
which families find really helpful when they don't know where that information
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. One of the, because I will talk a little bit about the 12 transitions, but one of the things that I was aware of from reading your book was the vortex that forms, and again, that sort of reminded me of a cervix, the opening, how a cervix dilates to, I'm not trying to get an answer that I want to hear, but I just believe that we have medicalized death to a point that we aren't letting it be a spiritual event. And 150 years ago or whenever, people did die naturally. What were those deaths like compared to the deaths now? And again, I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but I'm just really curious about that.
Well, a couple of things along that line of thought. Number one, how I was even motivated to write this book was I went through these 12 phases of transition is what I've coined this series of events with angels and deceased loved ones with my own mother in 2002 when she was dying. And that was the first time I'd ever been around anybody who was actually dying. And at that point, I'd been studying woo-woo for a while. And I started seeing my deceased loved ones in the room, and then angels appeared. And then I was seeing vortices happen and things like that. And I thought, oh my God, am I having a hot flash? Is this a midlife crisis? What's going on here? But then I knew that it was all part of the dying process from the spiritual side. And my mother was a retired principal and teacher. So it made sense that that would be her parting gift to me to have me share it with people, that I could experience it for the first time with her. And it was horrifying because I was losing my mother. And at the same time, it was glorious what I was seeing.
Fascinating.
So fast forward a couple of years, I'm with my mentor. And when she's doing a healing on me, Claire, I'm on a massage table face up, and my deceased loved one spirits line both sides of the massage table, and they're participating in the healing. Well, one day this Pope spirit showed up with the hat on and the shepherd's rod and the whole 9 yards. And I said to him, well, who are you? And my mentor, Susan, could see him as well. And he said, I'm Clement. And I said, there was a Pope Clement? I never heard of a Pope Clement. He said, yeah, I was number 6. And he was kind of laughing. And I said, well, okay, may I help you? He kind of like, why are you here? And he said, well, you're supposed to teach the world what happens when somebody dies, because it's been so bastardized over the millennia, and people are so afraid to die, and they're so afraid of what's going to happen when they die. And because you can see it, and everything you've done in your career has prepared you for this, and you just need to teach the world. And I laughed, Claire, and I said, I'm a businesswoman. I'm not doing that. People will think I'm nuts. He laughed and he said, yeah, whatever. So I go to get in the car, and just for kicks, I did a search on my phone about Pope Clement VI. Well, Claire, come to find out, this guy was in office during the Black Plague, and he's best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead. And I thought, I can't make that up. I never heard of the guy before. And here he's showing up and, in my healing all of a sudden, and he's been with me ever since. But to your point about what happened in the past, I believe everybody's been able to see these phases of transition that I see since the beginning of time. And perhaps that it took till the 5th century for people to really be learned enough to be able to read and write. And somebody could write this down as a prayer in the form of a Gregorian chant called In Paradisum, which in Latin talks about the angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise. Well, back in the 5th century, the most well-educated people were men, usually living in monasteries or synagogues. And so I believe that it perhaps took that long for somebody to just write down a prayer, but that's pretty ancient. That I thought with my mother, I thought, oh my God, this is what I'm seeing, is the angels and the loved ones here to greet her and lead her into paradise. And all the great religions of the world, all the great cultures of the world have some form of angels, elders, deceased loved ones that are there at the end of life. And And as we've become more well-educated, especially in the Western world, I think we discount the spiritual part of the equation because we want proof. We went, okay, something's not real unless I can prove it. Well, there's a lot of stuff that you can't see or feel, but we know it's real, like cell phone energy, microwave energy, whatever.
Electricity.
And electricity, right. And so we know it comes in through the wires. We know when we flip on the light switch, it lights up our room and illuminates whatever we need. So it's been really a fascinating journey. And now the proof is coming. It has come, it has arrived. There have been university-based research, several studies that talk about close to 90% of the people studied at the end of life are reporting seeing deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets, and how comforting it is. There are documentaries out there that talk about, there's actually in Texas, North Texas University did a study.
An alma mater.
Is that right? That's your alma mater?
I got my bachelor's from North Texas. Yeah.
Well, there you go. And I'm actually hosting a private screening of this documentary, where what they did was, I believe it was around 165 subjects, and they worked with psychics, and these were all people who were grieving, and they were able to communicate with their deceased loved one. And it had a profound effect in them, helping them deal with their grief.
Yeah.
And that's the first study of its kind that's ever been done at a public university.
Wow.
So more and more of this research is being done. And I like to tease the researchers and say, I love it when science catches up with woo-woo. Because woo-woo's been around a lot longer.
Yeah, well, but even from a practical point of view, I mean, I think I approach the practical aspects of death and dying, but I'm fascinated about this as well. And I just feel like there are, and I'm not going to ask you to do this unless you wanted to, but it's just like there are things that you can tap into and see physiologically the things that are happening to people as they are passing, and the ability that they have to not be in pain, not be in anxiety or fear at the end of life. Is that true? Is that not true? Is it maybe sometimes? Does that question make sense even?
Yeah. The spirit, we're all spirits attached to a body having a human experience. That's what I like to say. And the spirit is the main power source for the body, Claire. The body, as I perceive it, is inside the spirit. And it's in this container that I call the energy field membrane. And the membrane reminds me of really thin, stretchy saran wrap, the kind that you get on a tray of chicken breasts from the grocery store. Yeah. You know, that stuff's thinner and stretchier perhaps than the saran wrap in a box in our kitchen drawers. Well, when somebody is dying, the spirit starts to exit through the top of the head. And it looks like a cartoon caption bubble, a speech bubble that you would see the character's thoughts or words in it. And it hangs on to the top of the head as the person is getting closer and closer and closer to death. I don't scan people energetically from a medical standpoint if they're in one of the phases of transition.
Oh, okay.
Because back to the spirit being the power source for the body, the spirit's now outside of the body. It's still attached to the body, but it's not inside the body. But that is
clinically,
happening,
they're still alive.
Absolutely. Clinically, they're still alive because it's still attached. So they're still plugged in, but it would be the equivalent of me trying to view an X-ray in a pitch black room. There's no light for me to look at the X-ray. And when I'm scanning somebody energetically anywhere in the world, it's like I'm a human MRI. I'm looking at an X-ray or a CT scan or an MRI. So I don't do that, but I can tell you what phase of transition they're in by the configuration of the angels and the deceased loved ones. And I communicate with the person who's dying and all of that. The interesting thing about, you had mentioned the vortex before, and we can talk about that more. I equate that to what people who've had a near-death experience describe as going through a tunnel. A lot of it's pretty common that you'll hear that. And I think there are a lot of correlations between what I'm seeing and what near-death experience people are seeing as well.
Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier that people are experience this from all different traditions and cultures, and I guess religion and even no religion. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Because the spirits are going to show up in a way that's going to make sense to the person who's dying. I see angels as big wings, soft curls coming down to their shoulders, white gown, belted at the waist with a rope, barefoot, that kind of thing. Is that what angel energy really looks like? Who knows? That's how I think it looks, because I went through Catholic schools for 12 years.
Yeah, that would do it.
Thought. Yeah, that's what the statues look like and the paintings and that kind of thing. Somebody who grew up in an indigenous culture, like your Aboriginal people in Australia, they may see angel energy as a blob of purple energy. It may be totally different. And I believe, and what I've experienced through all these years of doing this work, especially very intensely over the past 5 years or so, is spirit's going to show up in a way that makes sense to the person with whom they're working or the person that they're helping. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. I just think a lot of religious belief has been layered onto the dying process that we, typically culturally in the Western world go through now. And some people would believe that if you didn't believe, or if you'd sinned or something like that, that you wouldn't get the same kind of exit that other people would get.
Absolutely. My parish pastor, Father John Fallon from the pulpit, said one day, people are so afraid to die because they don't know if they're going to fly or they're going to fry. I thought, what a great way to put it. What a great way to put it. And that was one of the reasons why Pope Clement has continued to encourage me to help spread this information, because it takes the fear out of it. It at least gives them an alternative to, well, what if this is really happening? What if we really are surrounded by angels? It gives a glorious component to something that perhaps could have been really scary, not only for the person who's dying, but also for the family. There is an exercise that I do, and I teach people how to do all of these buffet of psychicness skills that I learned. I think it's important to remember everybody has the ability. It's just a matter of developing and enhancing it. We all come in with the hardware. We just got to develop it. And I do this exercise, Claire, called the Walk to Heaven, where it's a dress rehearsal for people who are dying. And I'll do it telepathically with the person who's dying. And it always brings comfort. And in most instances, the person who's very afraid to die, after going through that exercise a time or two, they'll go ahead and pass on, because they have enough comfort and they know that their deceased loved ones' spirits are waiting for them once they get into non-physical, into heaven, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another question. So many people are estranged from their families in our culture nowadays, whether it's from, the tyranny of distance, like I'm going through in the pandemic, or if it's, just people just out and out don't have the same kind of relationships with their parents that they would like to. Yet from reading your book, those parents are very much part of their dying process. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I hear from people occasionally, and they'll say, my mother was awful when she was alive. I don't want anything to do with her in my dying process or in heaven. And I say, yeah. That was her human perspective. That was her human personality. All of the personality traits, whether they be good or bad or in between, stay with the body when somebody dies. All spirits are pure love. And as somebody's dying, it's the maternal spirit that's closest to the person who's dying who runs the show from the spirit world. That was very surprising to me. And I've seen it
that
countless times now. So it's the mother spirit that shows up first. If our mother's still alive, it's going to be her mother. If our maternal grandmother's still alive, it's going to be our maternal great grandmother. It's always on the maternal line.
That's so
And
interesting.
then
Why do you
I
think that
know.
is? I mean, I
Well,
love that, but
I think because we give birth and we take care of the child
that
as they
makes
grow
sense.
into an adult. And it's interesting because in many cultures, the Jewish culture comes up right on the top of my mind.
Mm,
A child is not considered Jewish unless it's born by a Jewish mother.
exactly. Yeah.
And there are Gentile women who marry Jewish husbands and they convert so that the children can be Jewish.
Mhm.
And so that's ancient. That's ancient. Somebody has known all this stuff throughout the ages, and it's just kind of been lost as we've progressed. But there are lots of pointers in all cultures that make sense
Yeah.
as to why this happened. Interesting point too, if somebody who's dying is adopted, it's
Mhm.
going to be the mother that raises that person that's going to be running the show from the spirit world. That spirit calls in the angels, calls in the other deceased loved ones, calls in the pet spirits. And the other interesting thing about the adoption thing is that baby spirits attach to the mom's energy field before they're conceived, and they look like little orbs. Have you ever seen an orb in a photograph, perhaps a family photograph or another kind of photograph? And we think, oh, the light was screwy and picked up a
Oh yeah.
speck
Yeah.
of dust or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
it looks like the orb that Glenda the Good Witch flies into Munchkin Land inside.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it looks like. And they show up on top of the shoulder of the mom. Well, baby's energy attaches to the mom's energy field sometimes years before they're conceived. And adopted baby's energy attaches to the mom's energy field that raises them. They attach to the birth mom's energy field and also the mom that raises them.
Mm, mm,
So I
very
think
interesting.
it's really, really sweet when that shows up. First time I saw that, I was at a party. This is probably 15 years ago or longer. And we were at a neighbor's for a party, and there was a woman there that I hadn't met. And my friend, the neighbor, said, "Can you scan her? She's not feeling well." And she had told her about me. She knew about me. And
Mhm.
I said, "Sure." And I said to her, "Are you pregnant with twins? Are you expecting twins? Are you whatever?" And Claire, she burst into tears. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have offended this woman. What have I said? And she said, no, 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 no. This was a Saturday night. She said, we're leaving Wednesday to fly to Guatemala because we're adopting twins and we're going to be there when they're born by C-section on
Oh,
Friday.
oh, that gives
And
me
I thought,
chills.
okay, this is an adoption thing. That was the first time I'd seen
Mm,
adoption. I've
mm,
seen it many, many times since.
wow. Okay, so what if it's two gay men?
It's still going to be the mother that birthed them. It's always
Mm,
the maternal line.
okay.
Great question.
Well,
Yeah.
there are so many
Well,
different scenarios.
yeah, but it's always on the maternal line. It's going to always
Interesting.
be the maternal person. Yeah. So
That's,
the gay men will be there in the paternal
mhm.
state, but then it would be the birth mother if a woman wasn't involved in raising them.
So let's talk a little bit, and I know you can't get into great detail, but read the book, you'll get the detail. Go into the 12 transitions that
Okay.
a body goes through, and maybe there's a time frame with it, or maybe there's not, but just yeah, the 12 transitions, fascinating.
Well, as I mentioned, the spirit exits the body through the top of the head,
Mhm.
and then the maternal spirit shows up. So phases of transition, I call it. Phase one would be the spirit has exited through the top of the head and is still attached on to the top of the head, like a cartoon caption bubble.
Mhm.
And then the maternal spirit shows up. The paternal spirit shows up. They call in the angels. These are big old angels, Claire. They're 6, 7 feet tall. They're big as I perceive
Are
them.
they male, female?
They're androgynous. Spirits don't have a gender.
Wow. Okay.
So they all look like Stepford wives to me. They all look like Stepford angels. They all look the same. Is that really what they
No,
look
that's
like?
a great analogy, but go
That's how I perceive them.
Okay.
To those of you that don't know what we're talking about, there was a movie out called The Stepford Wives where they all were the same. And it was really pretty creepy. But they all look the
These
same.
angels are creepy.
They're not creepy. Yes. So they're all the same. And then they start out in a circle with the parents anchoring the bottom of the circle. And as the person gets closer to death, that circle opens up into a horseshoe and then eventually into a straight line that goes across the foot of the bed. And when they're in the straight line, I say they're in angelic crowd control, because there are so many spirits that come to welcome the person. I call them the welcome to heaven committee. Do you remember the old welcome wagon women in the neighborhood? That you'd move into a new neighborhood and they'd bring you a basket of cookies or something. And so there's that. A couple of interesting nuances about phase 5-ish, 6-ish, about halfway through. There are 2 additional angels that show up on either side of what I call the spirit bubble. And their wings start to move eventually. And it reminds me of a giant owl, slow rhythmic movements, silent. And about phase 9, those wings have that movement of those angels' wings has started to create the vortex that you talked about earlier. And it looks like a tornado cloud, looks like a funnel cloud that's above the head of the person who's dying. And I can see, I can feel, and I can hear a vacuum. There's an upward pull. And it reminds me of driving through the car wash when you stay in the car and at the end they turn on the dryers and it sucks all the water up of your car.
The sound.
That's what it reminds me of. It's just this huge suction that's upward, like in a car wash. And so that's interesting. When I was writing my book,
is the soul distressed in any way?
No, not at all. No, It's glorious. No. And when I was writing my book, again, I just researched to see, like I had, where did the, angels will lead you and greet you into paradise. Where did that prayer originate? I researched just for kicks. I was led to research giant owl wings vortex. Well, come to find out, Claire, there's this thing called the Wingtip Vortex. And it's a phenomena that occurs with anything that flies, whether that be a bug, a bird, a plane, a jet, a kite, whatever. And it's these vortices that form underneath the wings, and it causes the upward lift. And I thought, okay, here's science catching up with woo-woo again. And if you Google Wingtip Vortex, you will see an unlimited amount of photographs of the wingtip vortices underneath planes and jets. You will see aeronautical engineering drawings. You will see all kinds of information on the wingtip vortex. So I think it's fascinating that this phenomena that's happening in the spirit world is causing a reaction in the physical world that I can feel, I can see, and I can hear. And it's helping the spirit separate from the body. That again is the tunnel, I believe, that people that report a near-death experience are talking about. And then that's phase 9. Phase 10, more and more spirits are coming. Phase 11, they're ready to go. They're just waiting for clearance for, lift off, and like from air traffic control. And then 12 is they're being escorted to heaven by angels on either side. It's really a glorious procedure that happens when everybody dies. Now, a couple of important points. Number one, time doesn't exist in the spirit world. Time is a human creation. Everybody goes through the 12 phases of transition, whether they die instantly, like in the case of a homicide or suicide,
next question,
or whether they die over days, weeks, months, years in a prolonged illness or a prolonged, death process. And the bottom line is nobody dies alone. Nobody dies alone. We're all surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets. May I mention something about the pets real quickly?
Oh, yes. I have so many rescue dogs that, I've taken care of. I want to hear about the pets.
All right. Pets show up midway through,
Mm.
and they show up just looking like what they looked like when they were alive. And I saw this with my mother. And there were dogs that we'd had when we were kids, and they'd been dead for 20 years. And I thought, oh my God, there's Frosty, and there's Rummy, and there's our white German Shepherd Frosty. And there were dogs that I had seen in pictures that my mother had had when she was growing up.
Mhm.
And when my uncle came for the funeral, I was describing these different dogs, and he said, oh yeah, that's Rowdy, and that's so-and-so, and all of that. I can always tell if somebody has either grown up on a farm or currently lives on a farm, because there'll be farm animals there.
Yeah.
And I'll see goats and ducks and pigs and cows and horses and the whole nine yards. It's a riot. I've seen those great big pet turtles, the great big ones.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen, oh my gosh, everything from ferrets to, I saw a skunk one time.
You said a snake too.
Snakes.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. It's wild. And it's really comforting to the family when I'm describing to them what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And they think, okay, well, my grandmother has been talking to her mother, who's been dead for 50 years. So maybe grandma really isn't hallucinating. Maybe grandma really is seeing her deceased loved one. And that's what the research is corroborating.
So you mentioned about the time as a human convention, invention, whatever, but is that how this end of life scenario can happen when possibly the soul has reincarnated already? I mean, how does that work if reincarnation does exist? Then, and I'm not here or there, but say it does, how can they show up in this way? The mother, the father, and all the...
Yeah, great question again. I do believe reincarnation exists because I've done so many past life scans where we get all kinds of detailed information, Claire, that we can corroborate with historical documents. And I always say, I just can't make this stuff up. I'm not that creative. And I'm not. And as far as the reincarnation thing goes, here's my belief on it, that we can be in multiple places at the same time. We're made in the image and likeness of God. Not that God looks like some old man sitting on a cloud up in heaven in the sky, but that we're made in the image and likeness of God in spirit form. Mm-hmm. So if God can be everywhere all at the same time, and we're made in his image and likeness, then we can be multiple places at the same time. There are some schools of thought that there are multiple realities happening concurrently. Mm-hmm. And is that feasible? Yeah. Do I know for sure? No. Will we know when we die? Yeah. When we're back in non-physical, we'll know. But is it feasible? Yeah, I can buy that. Makes my head want to explode when I think too much about it, because we don't have a frame of reference in our human existence for that. So it's hard for us to understand some of this stuff. And I don't know that we're really supposed to know everything.
Yeah. There was a book that came out many years ago, Journeys of the Soul, and Newton, I can't remember, Newton is the last name of the author. And he talked about your worst enemy on earth could be your best friend in heaven, because that we all come to earth to experience certain things, and that, after we die, there's like almost a school of these people that we've known so many times. And, before you go, your roles are kind of assigned, like, okay, I'll be this bad person, so you can grow this way. Or I always thought that was interesting. So when I have or hear about, people having extreme animosity, I'm like going, okay, they just agreed to play that role.
Exactly. Exactly. And we come in with a script, basically, and lots of subscripts. Our basic script is we're here to create. And,
Mhm.
you think about we create all day long. You create getting out of bed, you create getting a shower, you create getting dressed, you create making your bed, making breakfast, whatever.
Mm,
And we create, create, create. Then when we get what we want, then what do? We think of something else to create. And
exactly.
then what happens? We die and we go to heaven, and then we dream up something else we want to come back and create again and explore. I use the analogy for past lives of Shakespeare's Hamlet.
Hmm.
If you think about how many times has Hamlet been performed since Shakespeare wrote it in 1602, who knows? Think about where was it performed, in what country, in what time period, what was the language, who were the
Mm,
actors, who was the costume designer, who was the director, whatever. Same script, different perspective each time.
yeah.
And that's how I see our lifetimes. And I will see multiple lifetimes that are exploring different perspectives of the same script. Perhaps somebody that commits suicide in this lifetime, in past lifetimes, was the parent of, the friend of, the colleague of, the sibling of, the spouse of, the doctor of, whatever. In this round, they wanted to explore what it was like to be that person who committed suicide. And I find that is comforting to people when they can at least entertain that may be feasible.
And you also said, I think I've listened to so many interviews, but in your book, that really, though, we do have free will and we do have choice in so many of these matters, even of when we die.
Oh, absolutely. Well, from your just all your vast experience, talk to any funeral director, and they will tell you endless stories about the family sat with grandma for 3 weeks, and Aunt Susie was on duty, and she went out to get a cup of coffee, and grandma slipped away while Aunt Susie was out of the
Hmm.
room for 3 minutes.
Hmm.
And the family is going, Grandma, really? What was up with that? We all decide when we go, where we go, how we go, who's with us or not when we go. When my own mother died, everybody was on the way, and they got there about 10 minutes after she left. And I was with her. I was the only one with her, with a
Hmm.
nurse and an aide. That's how she wanted it. She knew I could see what was going on. And you mentioned earlier that you advise for people in the industry who are in end of life caregiving capacities
Hmm.
to stay with the person, stay with the body
Hmm.
until you really feel that it's all done. Because the nurses in the hospice facility where my mother was said, okay, she's gone, her heart has stopped. Well, her spirit hadn't left yet. And I could see that. So you are right on with that, girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
I mean,
Agree
the
with
only
that.
exception I would give with people that I work with is if they're an organ donor, and then for obvious reason that needs to kind of move along. But I find that there is a big palliative movement and understanding that's growing in death literacy, and that people are more open to staying with the body for a long period of time, even if they die in a hospital or in a facility. Families can ask for that and it will generally be honored. So, and that wasn't always the case.
Well, I think there's a lot of information, certainly on the afterlife and near death experiences, but not much information about what's really happening when somebody's dying, and certainly not much information on the spiritual side of the equation,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I think my spirit guide, Pope Clement, is all over me to get this information out there. And the examples that I can tell you of families with whom I've worked, when they see these drawings and they see the illustrations, which are on my website,
Mm-hmm.
askjulieryan.com. Anybody can go see them, and you can download a chart. I tell families, download the chart, store it on your phone, save it on your phone. And then all you have to do is just ask God, ask your guardian angel, ask whoever, just ask out loud, ask in your head what phase of transition is my mom in or whomever, and
Mm.
you're going to get a number and it's going to snap into your head like a thought instantly, as fast as you can snap your fingers. And then if you're getting information that your loved one is moving through the phases fairly
Mhm.
quickly, it makes sense to bring the family in.
Yeah.
Another thing that's important to note too, Claire, is that people can go in and out of the different phases. They can be phase 9, go back to phase 6, come back to phase 7, and that's all part of the dying process too.
Mhm.
It's not as common, but it certainly happens. And somebody can be in phase 11 and completely recover and not go. And a friend of my
Yeah.
brother's, that happened to him. He was in phase 11. He was in surgery. I didn't think he'd make it out of the operating room. I was scanning him in the operating room. I could see what they were doing in the surgical procedure. I could read the anesthesia equipment. I can tell you how many surgeons are in the room. I could tell you where they are in the procedure. And I thought he's not going to make it out alive. And 15 years later, he's fine. So
So,
that's that free will thing.
yeah. So how do you take care of you doing this? I mean, does it take your energy how does it affect your energy to work with? I'm sure it's not always great. Sometimes you may energetically come across things that are disturbing.
Well, not very often. It would be in the case if somebody was really sick and I was helping them with a medical situation. Everything can be healed. I've seen miraculous healings happen. Nobody heals anybody else. No doctor, no medical provider, no shaman, no energetic healer heals anybody else. We all heal ourselves. An example, I talk in analogies a lot because it gives us a frame of reference for this woo-woo stuff we're talking about. And imagine when somebody has surgery at the end of the procedure, the surgeon's going to close the incision with sutures and staples. Well, the surgeon doesn't make the patient's skin grow back. The patient makes their own skin grow back. So when I'm working with somebody, I'm sending an energetic healing. It's up to their spirit to integrate the healing or not. And sometimes death is the healing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so how do I deal with this when I work with people, and I do all day long from all across the world? I could scan you if you're on Mars. I could scan you if you're in a different solar system. It doesn't matter. It's just energy. It energizes me. And when I do my show
That's
on
great to
Thursday
know.
nights, oh yeah. When I do my show on Thursday nights, it's a 2-hour live syndicated radio show that we then release as a podcast. So I have dozens and dozens of people call in. I'll normally get anywhere between 10 and 12 on each week. So I'm bebopping around the globe. Okay, here's what's happening with your dog. Here's where your grandmother is in the phases of transition. Here we're talking about your liver. Yes, it would make sense for you to take this job, whatever. And so I'm wired by the end of that just because my energy is so propped up. And I raise it to a very high level to be able to do this. And this is what I teach people around the world how to do. It's instant and everybody has the ability.
So you train other people to do that.
I do.
That's
yes.
Great. So going back to your live podcast, is there, we'll have all of the links and we'll have everything, when people are watching the podcast, but is it a call in or is it?
It is. It's a call-in show. It's a live radio show that's syndicated, and it's from 8 to 10 Eastern every Thursday night, unless I'm on vacation, which is a half a dozen times a year, maybe, that I'm not going to do a live show on Thanksgiving on Thursday night. So I'll have a guest that I'll interview and have it pre-recorded. But it's a blast.
So
Claire.
It's tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night.
It's
my
your Wednesday
your
night,
Thursday.
my Thursday. Well,
that's
that's
right.
great. Is it, so I've got this like world radio thing. It's not on a radio station. It's streaming on your internet.
No, it's on a radio station. It's terrestrial radio. It's a syndicated radio show that you can live stream off of my website, askjulieryan.com. You can listen to
Okay.
it live. You can call in. There's a number that's posted there on the homepage of my website and on all my social media, Ask Julie Ryan on all the social media channels. And we'll post the call-in numbers and a reminder every Thursday. And we'll say, okay, remember, call in tonight if you have a
Yeah.
question.
I mean,
It's really fun.
yeah,
It's really
I've
fun.
listened to several episodes, and I just you do you bring a lot of good energy and a lightness of being to some very serious things where people are very serious about it, and you just I think that's one of the reasons why you impress me is that I think to do this kind of work we have to be so grounded, but being grounded doesn't mean you have to be dour. And
Well, everything can be healed. So I don't edit anything that I get. And who am I to decide what you need to hear? It's spirit working through me and with me to help facilitate comfort and healing. And if somebody's losing a loved one, for them to know, okay, grandma's surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones and every dog she ever had. And how glorious is that? And she's in phase 7, progressing into phase 8. Go see her, go be there if you want to be there. And it's one of my favorite stories is I was working with a family in Athens, Greece, and the husband was dying and he was not able to communicate. And he told me telepathically that he wanted to talk to his sister. When I said, what do you need? He said, I need to talk to my sister. And I was on the phone with his wife. And I said, he wants to talk to his sister. Is she close by? Can you have her come over? And she said, no, she's in Australia. He was in Athens. She's in Sydney. And I said, well, get her on the Zoom or a FaceTime or something so that he can see her, even though he can't communicate. And they did. And then he was able to pass shortly thereafter. So I find that people will wait until they can say goodbye, or at least until the person, in this case, he wanted to be able to have a communication with his sister, even though he couldn't communicate anymore. I believe he knew the sister needed to see him to say her goodbye.
Yeah.
And I find too that with the coming out of the COVID situation, Claire, so many people are suffering because their loved one died during that time and they weren't able to be with them in the hospital or the nursing home, whether they died of COVID or not. Most of them didn't. It was something else that was affecting them. But their loved ones who are left behind are really grieving.
Oh, yeah.
And the guilt is just mind blowing. And my message to them is they didn't die alone. They were surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones, and we can talk to them and they will give you information that will let you know that they are just fine and everything worked out fine. And there's no need for you to be fretting about this.
That's great. I wanted to talk to you about so much more, but we're going to talk again, and I just askjulieryan.com. Go to that website. The podcasts that she's done are there. You can get information about her book, The Angelic Attendants is the name of the book.
Right.
Yeah. And there are books for pets and kids, and it's just a lovely website. But you are a lovely person, Julie Ryan.
Oh,
I'm
thank
so
you.
happy I got to meet you.
Anybody that wants my book, wants to read it, Angelic Attendants, what really happens as we transition from this life into the next, I have props. Just email or just go to my website, askjulieryan.com, and go to the Ask Julie page and just put a note in there and say, hey, I heard you on Claire's show. I'd like a free copy of your book, and we'll send you the digital and the audio book version for free as a gift, just for listening.
It's
and
a
if
great
you want
read.
one of the kids' books, Angel Messages for Cats or Dogs or Kids, and they're darling. They have great illustrations in them. Just they're cute as they can be. Just say, I have kids or grandkids, please send me a copy of those books too, and we'll send you the digital copy just as a gift.
That's
so askjulieryan.com, the Ask Julie button, I heard you on Claire's show. I'd love a copy of your book.
And also, if there are people that are listening that would like a psychic reading or a past life reading or a medical intuitive reading, that does cost money, but it's money well spent, I'm guessing. And yeah, it's you're very generous to be offering that, and I really appreciate it. So
my pleasure.
We will speak again, and thank you so much, Julie, for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, sending you love. Mwah, mwah. From sweet home Alabama.
Sweet home Alabama. Bye.